Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend a little bit of time talking about cards from Lord of the Rings, the living card game. I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Grant Thompson, just along for the ride.
And in this episode, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Send for Aid. It's a player side quest from the leadership sphere that has one cost and has 6 quest points. And has a response that after you defeat the stage or quest through it, you get to search the top 10 cards of your deck and put any ally into play under your control. And then every player who does that has to shuffle up his deck. Grant, what do you think of Send for Aid?
Well, to start off with, I haven't used it.
Do you typically use side quests?
I've built a side quest deck before, but generally the only side quests I use are gather information and probably double back from the Spirit Sphere, mainly because gather information allows us to look for any card in my deck and add it in my hand, and double back allows me to basically reduce my threat by 5. This one seems quite interesting for what it does. You're allowed to search the top 10 cards of your deck and put one ally into play under your control, so that allows you to get some of the bigger, beefier allies out straight away. So I can see its uses. Looking at the artwork, it looks pretty much how I expected the Golden Hole to look for King Theoden. And the quote for it is brilliant as well. Often the Rohirrim have aided us, but now the Lord Denethor asks for all your strength and all your speed from Hiragon in The Return of the King. And one thing I do like about the side quests is the fact that after they've exploded, you add them to the victory display. I could see me using this in a leadership deck if I ever build another one. How about yourself?
First of all, I think that this idea of player side quests is really neat. It's fairly new in the expansions, so the idea that the player can then choose to waylay themselves on the actual scenario, I think that thematically the idea of any side quest is really neat. And so this being our very first side quest that we've done in any episode, I think it's important to mention that I feel like that a side quest itself is a very neat thematic sort of addition in terms of types of player cards. I really like the response. This is one of those player cards that gets more powerful the more people you're playing with or the more decks you're playing with. I think it loses a little bit because when you're playing solo, because there's only one player. The fact that each player can search their deck for an ally in the top 10 cards of his deck, I think becomes powerful when you're playing with 3 or 4 people. You know, you could get a Gandalf out, you could get a Beorn out, you can get any of the allies that are floating around in the kind of the standard archetypes of the 4 deck player game. All of that said,
Flight out too.
Yeah, you could get out Farmer Maggot. That said, I primarily play solo, so there's really not a time where I typically add side quests to my deck when I'm playing solo. I do every once in a while. I keep them in my sideboard, especially for the first stage of Overhill and Underhill, where you're questing through and there's 7 quest points, and if you quest too fast, all of a sudden the 3 trolls come out in the second stage and you get thwacked by them. So you have to kind of figure out ways to slow yourself down. And so this is one of those cases where a side quest really comes into play really nicely to slow yourself down. Send for Aid may not be that side quest. It could be any side quest, so it's not like I'm speaking specifically for this. I think that it's 6 quest points is a lot. And you know me, Grant. I have like formulas for all the stuff for stat lines and hit points and threat costs and casting costs, like hard cast costs and things like that. But I have yet to figure out what the quest point effect formula is. And so 6 quest points is a lot to have to go through in order to get an ally. So I don't think it's worth it for 1 or 2 people necessarily, but I think if you're playing 3-4, the epic multiplayer mode, in some of the other things, I mean, you're probably not going to do it for the Black Gate or any of those scenarios, but it's still, it becomes a greater option the more people you're playing with.
Come on, it's so thematic, right? We're going to march on the Black Gate.
Right.
Get the Wozers. Get the guys from Dol Amroth. Just bring everybody you can. Send for aid. Help.
I do like that it's a leadership card. I mean, for me, that's thematic. This sort of card, I think, is more leadership than it is tactics. I feel like tactics is more of a kind of a brute force sort of thing. This is more of a finesse play to do. But I still am not I'm still not a fan. The fact that it's also 1 per deck just means that I'm not going to be able to draw it. Now, if you're going to use the hero, and everybody knows now that I talked about the hero, if you're going to use Thurindir, I don't want to confuse Thurindir with Thranduil. It's a lot of Thurindir, right? The Dunedain hero. I mean, if you want to use him, I think that is a good match because his setup action is you get to search your deck for a side quest. So in order to if you're going to put Send for Aid in there, you might as well do it at the very beginning and you get an extra ally out. That's a pretty cool thing. But I don't think it's setting any of my decks on fire.
Well, that's where I disagree. I mean, yes, it gains more power the more people that you have, but even playing in a 2-player deck, or even in a solo deck, you have the chance to scry your deck for the top 10 cards and place any ally you want out of those 10 cards onto the field, whether that be, say, a Farmer Maggot, or even something as big as Bjorn, or something in between, like a Glorfindel from the ally Glorfindel. You can get anything and just pull it out. And yes, it is 6 quest points, but generally speaking, you make 6 quest points even during the quest phase. You'll probably make them, especially in some of the quests where you're running leadership or you're running spirit or even law. They all have high willpower or reasonably high willpower, so that you'll be able to quest for what you need within at least, maybe not in first turn, but definitely by the second turn. And I think that ability to play an ally out of the top 10 cards of your deck is pretty powerful, even in a 2-player game. I mean, I haven't run it, but I'm looking at it and I think I can fit it in one of my dual-handed decks.
Right. The only problem I have with the draw the 10 cards is that, there's no guarantee in those 10 cards you're going to draw even an ally. I mean, unless you're running specifically a very ally-heavy deck, I think standard deck building is, 20, 22 allies, which leaves room for 30 other cards. And I'm totally not trying to make a judgment about everybody's deck building, but I think that, when you're relying on having to draw a card in 10 cards, you're probably draw an ally within 10 cards. You're probably going to draw an ally, but it's probably not going to be the one you need. So it would be better if it were to play out of your hand, but I don't know. I'm just not a fan of this card.
Okay, so on the ring side of things, with one ring being the best and 10 being the worst, what would you ring Send for Aid?
If I'm going to Send for Aid, I'm going to give it 8 rings. It's just not a card that I want to use. It's too many quest points. You can only have 1 per deck, and I only see the usage in this when I'm going to run a side quest deck with Rindir. So I don't know. I'm just not. I do like some side quests, but this one in particular, I'm not a huge fan of. How about you?
Well, as I say, I haven't used it yet, but I can see that I could possibly use it in a couple of my decks on multiplayer. Maybe not so much solo, but definitely multiplayer. I think I'd give it, until I've used it fully, probably 6 rings, until I can get a better grasp of the mechanic of the card. So why don't you join us next time for Hurlwin the Fair, the leadership ally from the Against the Shadows cycle.
Okay, have a great day.